Ever been in that tough spot where someone you love is seriously ill and you're hit with these big medical decisions?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, where do you even start? Especially when it's something as basic as, well, keeping them fed.
Right, you'd think just get some food in them, but
Exactly. But it gets complicated fast, and that's what we're digging into today.
yeah, the surprising science of how and when we feed patients who are critically ill.
Because it's not as simple as we might think.
Not at all. It's easy to picture the gut is just this, I don't know, pipe for food.
Right, just a tube.
But it's way more than that. It's hugely important for our immune system, which is crucial when someone's already vulnerable.
So, like, if someone's on a ventilator, unable to eat normally,
Exactly. We're not just deciding on calories at that point. It's about how feeding impacts their whole recovery, not just keeping the lights on, so to speak.
which brings us to this study, NUTRIREA-2, really shook things up in critical care.
Huge study, multi-center, looked at patients in shock. Exactly the kind of rigorous research we need in this field.
And they were trying to answer, what was it specifically?
So if you start enteral feeding, that's feeding directly into the stomach, within 24 hours of going on a ventilator,
Okay, so right away.
right away, does that improve their chances of survival compared to, say, IV nutrition?
Seems intuitive, right? Like, give the body what it needs ASP.
You'd think so, but the results were a bit of a shock, no pun intended.
Didn't pan out that way.
No. They found early enteral feeding, at least what we call normocaloric feeding.
And just for our listeners, that means...
Normocaloric means aiming for the patient's usual calorie intake. So not restricting calories, just delivering them straight to the gut.
Okay, got it.
So that didn't actually reduce deaths, which challenges this whole idea that getting the gut going ASAP is always best in these really sick patients.
Wow. So it's not as simple as gut good, IV bad then.
Way more nuanced.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more interesting is they also looked at the downsides of this early enteral feeding.
And were there any?
Yeah, they found more complications like, vomiting, diarrhea in the group that got the early enteral feeding. Didn't affect survival in this study, but
But makes you think about patient comfort, right?
yeah,
And if it's not clearly helping them live longer.
exactly. And that's where it gets us to thinking, okay, if early full-calorie feeding into the gut isn't always the answer, what is?
Right, because we gotta do something.
And this is where hypocaloric feeding is getting a lot of attention.
So instead of aiming for, say, 2,000 calories a day right off the bat.
You might start much lower, maybe even half that, in those first few critical days.
Interesting. And what's the thinking there?
The idea is, if the gut's inflamed, maybe overworking it in that acute phase actually hinders recovery later on.
Huh. So it's like sometimes less is more.
Potentially, yeah. Still early research, but it's fascinating how this challenges what we thought we knew.
It really shows just because something seems logical.
Doesn't mean our bodies always agree.
Exactly. Okay, so we've been talking about what we put in our bodies, but what about how surgeons get into them? And I know, might seem like a jump, but stick with me.
I see where you're going with this.
It's about those choices that, even in the most advanced procedures, can make a big difference later on. Like hernias.
Right, it's something most people don't think about until they need surgery. Even these minimally invasive things, smaller cuts, it still matters how you get in there.
Exactly. It's like you could take the scenic route
Or the one riddled with potholes.
Exactly. And this study, Johnson and the team, they looked at this with colon surgery, taking out a section laparoscopically. Turns out where they took out the specimen made a difference for hernias later.
Huge difference. And they used CT scans to find these hernias.
Which is important, right?
Because you can have a hernia that's not bugging you yet.
Hey.
Silent, they call them. But it doesn't mean they won't be trouble down the line.
So it's like catching them early. And what did they find with the CT scan approach?
Okay, get this. The group that had their specimen taken out through a fan and steel incision.
Fan and style? Remind folks what that is again.
Yeah, it's a low horizontal cut, basically like a bikini line incision. Common for, like, gynecological stuff.
Makes sense.
So that group, 0 hernias. 0.
Wow, that's incredible. Compared to
the group where they took the specimen out through the midline, up and down the middle of the belly, 25% hernia rate, night and day.
Huge. So why the difference? Just that one choice of where they make the exit route makes that big an impact.
Well, think about it. Your midline, it's under a lot of stress naturally, bending, twisting, all that. And there's this tough band of tissue there, the linea alba.
Like the body's natural corset.
Right.
Holds everything in.
Exactly. And if you cut through that, weakens it. Makes hernias more likely down the line. Plus, Just more pressure there in general.
So, okay, then you'd think with all the fancy robotics in surgery now, that'd solve it, right? Smaller incisions, less cutting.
You'd hope so. But in this study, robotics didn't change the hernia rate much at all.
Really? Why not? I'd have assumed.
It's about the incision choice, not just the tool. Robots help with precision, smaller cuts overall, but if you're still going in a way that weakens the body's natural support.
Same problem, different tool.
Exactly. So it highlights something we always say. Good surgical technique, understanding the body, it matters more than just having the fanciest equipment.
Absolutely. So it's not just about the what, the surgery itself, but the how, even down to these details, makes you think if you're facing something like this.
Ask your surgeon about it. That's what I tell people. Be informed, it's your body.
Right. Knowledge is power, as they say. It's like both these studies, they make you realize, even in medicine, with all the science, there isn't always this clear-cut answer, you know?
Yeah, and that's something we keep coming back to, right? Just because it's been done a certain way forever doesn't mean it's the best way, or that
Yeah.
we even fully get what it means long term.
That's what gets me. These studies, short-term, they tell us something. Did the patient live to 28 days? Did they have a hernia a year out? But after that.
$1 million question. Like those feeding choices, maybe someone recovers faster at first, but a year later, are they stronger, more energy, or...
Exactly. Or those hernias, silent on the scan. Maybe they never bothered the person, but what if, down the line? We just don't know enough yet.
And it's not just about surviving the crisis, right? It's how you live after. Makes you think, how do we even measure that quality of life well, in a way that matters to patients?
Because the scan only tells you so much.
Exactly. So much we still need to figure out. It's not just what works, but why, and how that impacts someone years down the road.
Makes you realize this whole medical field, it's not an endpoint, it's a journey. Always more to learn, more to question.
Which is exciting, right? Asking why, being a little skeptical of the easy answers, that's how we make things better.
So it's not just doctors' jobs, but for all of us, patients too, to be curious. Ask the questions, dig a little deeper. You might be surprised what you find out.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Next time you hear a medical truth, the kind everyone just accepts.
Especially if it's something you just always believed, right?
Exactly. Take a second. Ask yourself, what's the evidence? Could there be more to it? Chances are there is. And that's what makes this whole journey of discovery so fascinating.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep those curious minds going.